child to college if we can't afford it out of our ordinary income. And then the government can print the money, which is likely to be the result of this. But when the government prints money, again, you don't need a Nobel Prize in economics to know that if you print up a bunch of paper and give it to people to spend for the available goods and services in the society, all you end up doing is causing price inflation as people use the extra paper dollars to bid against each other to buy this, buy that, buy this, buy that. And the cumulative effect is rising prices in general. And every degree to which price inflation goes up depreciates the value of the units of money, the dollars in our pockets. It steals from us through a rising cost of living. Will that be the path? Well, I can tell you that in the United States over the last year, the Federal Reserve has increased the money supply by $2 trillion. $2 trillion. Now, it is true that most of that money has not percolated into the U.S. economy yet. Either banks have been hesitant and cautious to lend as much as they had been in the bubble period, or they have raised their creditworthy standards to what they were before they were tempted to expand their loan base with all of that extra money that the Fed had increased earlier in the decade. So when you hear it says, oh, banks are tight with money, they're not lending. No, all they've done is return to the credit standards that they had before the bubble. Oh, do you have collateral? Do you have money as a down payment for a house? Do you have a reasonable business plan? What a shock that the bank should ask us questions. At the same time in the United States, the Federal Reserve has been paying interest on unlent balances that the banks carry with the Federal Reserve. Just like you have a bank account and you get interest for money that you have there, the banks are now collecting interest for money that they leave on deposit with the Federal Reserve unlent out. They call it excess reserves. Okay? But the fact is that I'm sure all of you know what's happening in the United States. As far as the eye can see, trillion-dollar deficits by the Federal Reserve, by the federal government. Okay? The government spending close to $1 trillion a year for at least the next 10 years over what it takes in taxes. Where's this extra $1 trillion approximately on average each year going to come from? Well, if they try to borrow it from abroad, they're going to find the fact that eventually the Chinese and others are not going to be willing to keep taking more and more debt from the U.S. Which means they will go to these banks domestically to some degree and to some extent and want the domestic financial markets to fund the government's deficit spending. And then at that point, all of that $2 trillion is going to start being pushed into the economy as the government borrows it that have been sitting there unlent so far, and it'll percolate through the economy. And prices will start rising. And then it'll start being spread all around the world. Because what will happen is that the U.S. will go through an artificial inflationary boomlet. Goods will be sucked back into the United States from abroad again. The dollars will flow out around the world, and these dollars will then be the basis of other countries to expand their own money supplies using dollars as reserves, which they have historically done. That's the dilemma that we're in globally, epicentered in the U.S. And why is this the case? It's because we no longer believe in freedom. We no longer believe in free markets. We no longer believe that the role of government is not to regulate, control, manage, oversee, supervise, stabilize. But the purpose of government is to see that each of us is secure in our life, our liberty, and our honestly acquired property. And as long as we abide by those rules of the game, which have been around for a long time, somebody wrote them on a tablet several thousands of years ago. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. That's fraud or deception, right? So, these are basic ideas that have been around for a while. But if government enforces these things as the basic and essential rules of the game, then government has done everything that it can do to assure an environment in which free, creative, innovative individuals can go about the business of saving and investing, working and producing, responding to the wants of others through the price signals of supply and demand and profits versus losses, and to keep the economy on an even keel. Now, I'm not an expert, obviously, on the economics, let alone the politics of the Bahamas. But I tried to do a little bit of homework before I came here. And so let me just allude to you. I understand a little bit of your problems. What, for several decades now, what does your government run every year? A budget surplus or a budget deficit? A budget deficit. Where does this money come from? It must be borrowing it, or it must be creating it. It's certainly not taxing it. Not that taxes are good, but the deficit means that if there's a shortfall of revenue relative to spending. I understand that there are some people in this island nation who would like to see more regulation, attempts of more self-sufficiency in some types of production. You're a small island nation. You import many things and live off a few exports and a tourist trade. The last thing you want to do is to have anything that threatens or impedes foreign investment and the attractiveness of tourism. And your ability to be able to manufacture or supply whatever commodities or services you can specialize in as the means of paying for all the things that you import. Therefore, you want to keep your barriers to trade virtually zero, to make it inexpensive for your consumers and producers to import either finished goods or any raw materials they use for some exporting activities, and to make it attractive in terms of what hotels and restaurants can afford to charge to keep that flow of tourists in. And you certainly should not be afraid of foreign investments, as I'm sure some are. Oh, the people come in, they buy up everything. You know, when I was advising what was emerging this new democratic government in Lithuania, in the Soviet Union, one of the fears that they had, we've been a socialist economy under the Soviet Union, we're poor, our capital is old and dilapidated, nothing has any value. Some American will come in and for $32 will buy up the entire country.